Alrighty, hi, welcome to another BioDevils podcast. Today we're going to be talking about something very special today, something that I know myself and Chaos wanted to talk about for a very, very long time, and today we're finally getting around to talking about that. But why don't I go ahead and introduce my guests? You all know me as BioDevil Dom, but I'll go down the list here. Chaos, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
What's going on, guys? KaptainKaos.
Alrighty, and then next up we got Singh. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey guys, my name is Singh Long. Not much else to say on my end, but looking forward to this podcast.
Gotcha. And then last but not least, we got as always, I should say, Mr. Brandel, Sir Brandel, ImmortalBrandel. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Why am I here? I mean, hey, how you guys doing? I'm excited to talk about some Shenmue, some Shifu. I just get it wrong here. And yeah, hopefully we have a great discussion.
There probably is like a Ryo Hazuki mod for Sifu at this point.
Dude, I want to see that actually.
I've seen a Neo mod for it.
You know what? Excuse me. Research.
He's gonna do some research really quick. Okay. But yeah, so anyway, while he's looking into that, yeah, like I said before, this is something that I know myself and Chaos, we wanted to do this for a very long time. We just never got around to doing it, and now we're finally doing it. So we are, and look at that, he already found it. It's legit. Anyway. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and get into this podcast. I'll go ahead and read off the first question, and we'll just kind of go from there. How did you first find out about Shenmue, and what is your favorite game in the series so far? For me, I actually kind of just heard about it from other people talking about it on YouTube. I didn't really know much about it. I didn't really delve into like finding more about it until Shenmue 3 was announced, and then I really wanted to kind of learn more about Shenmue and really get into the series. So far, it's kind of a mixed bag for me as to which is my favorite game, because there's a lot of things I like about Shenmue 1, there's a lot of things I like about Shenmue 2, and there's a lot of things that I like about Shenmue 3, and I just don't necessarily have a favorite amongst the three.
Yeah, with me, I guess, like, I used to be really into collecting, like, retro games and stuff, and, I still have, like, I had a Sega Dreamcast, and, I had a copy of Shenmue 1 and 2 I got from, pretty sure I got it from a used game store that used to be around here, unfortunately isn't around here anymore. But, yeah, I like Dom, I didn't really know, like, I kind of knew about it from the internet, but I just knew that, you know, it's a very highly regarded game. It is a classic, or kind of, I guess you'd say more like maybe a cult classic in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I didn't really know too much about it, except that it had a lot of QTEs, and it was very, like, kind of a story-heavy game. And I decided, like, you know, when I was on vacation one time, and I brought my Dreamcast with me, I decided to start playing it, and I was kind of immediately enamored with the story. Like, I mean, and it's not it's really not the most complex story or anything like that, but I guess, well, I really shouldn't say so much the story, but more like the, I guess you'd say the experience, because what's really appealing about Shenmue is just the, fact that you can just kind of explore this place, and it's not like a really big area or anything, but there's so much to do. There's so many people to talk to, and there's so many different events you can take, you can do, just kind of mess around in the arcade or talk to random people. And you know, like, the story, like I said, the story's not anything great, but it still was enough to keep my attention. I was kind of interested in, you know, the different, you know, just some of the different plot points, and just everything you could do in the game, and also how it had that day and night cycle. Like, it was one of the, correct me if I'm wrong, I think one of the first games to really kind of do that, where it had, like, you know, you're kind of on a timer in a way, where, you know.
Yeah, Shenmue was really one of the first few games to really, like, pioneer a lot of stuff,
and it was
like
also,
with the
like,
QTEs.
one of the best looking games of its time as well. And yeah, one of the first games to do the QTEs, I guess, aside from, like, you know, the David Cage stuff. But yeah, I was just really, it was hard to put down once you picked it up, just because there's so much you could do in the game, uh, and yeah, it really kind of pulled me in. So after I started the first game, I just really got into it, and played through the first game, played through the second one, and was just of course, obviously after finishing the second one, was just so disappointed to know that that was it until we really get until we got the announcement of Shenmue 3. That is. So yeah, I kind of felt everybody's pain after finishing Shenmue 2 and it just and kind of leaving off on that cliffhanger. And there's really nothing, as far as we knew at the time, there was just nothing after that. And at least, it came back in a way. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Well, I guess in my case, I kind of heard it through word of mouth on the internet. This was like somewhat during the early days, around the time when the Xbox version of Shenmue 2 was released.
Mm-hmm.
So one day I just went to a store, found a brand new sealed copy for about $5, and I figured, you know what, may as well get into the series. Thankfully, it came with a DVD of the Shenmue movie, which was, for those who don't know, essentially just footage of the first game being interspersed without a HUD. So it gave anyone a chance to catch up on the plot details of going into Shenmue 2, even though that had a built-in digest intro whenever you boot up that game for the first
yeah,
time.
my copy of Shenmue 2 actually came with that.
Mhm. So, as odd as it sounds, my first gameplay experience was actually with Shenmue 2. It's ironically enough the only game in the series that I've actually played to completion, despite having copies of Shenmue 1 via the HD collection and Shenmue 3, which I did get after it was released on Steam. So, I would say with confidence that my 2 would be my favorite, only because it's the one I've had the most experience with.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, so I guess I kind of like Dom. Like it's kind of hard for me to pick a favorite. Uh, 1 and 2 both are, in my opinion, about equally as good. But I guess gun to my head, I would say 2. Just because it feels like there's much more that happens in 2 as opposed to 1. In terms of like major plot developments and stuff. So I guess in that regard, yeah, I would probably have to say 2.
Alright. Well, for me, my earliest memory was actually Shenmue 2 on the Xbox. And then sometime later, one of my brothers actually had the game for Dreamcast, but I don't think I ever played it or not. Don't remember that little detail. It's been a long time, right? But after that, though, one of my friends who's a YouTuber, he streamed the game, like around 6 years ago, and that got my interest back into Shenmue, and I started, delving into the lore and whatnot, and that's when. Now, people come to me for Shenmue stuff back in the day, tons of information. Now, I don't remember a lot of it, but that's irrelevant. But as far as my favorite game, I was honestly say 2, only because it greatly improved upon what happened in 1. I mean, what stuff that happens in 1, the gameplay, traversal, you name it. But the one thing I prefer in 1 over 2 is the pacing of the story. As weird as that sound, because you can get things done once you know what you're doing. Of course, get things done faster in 1 compared to 2. But 2 is a much bigger game in scope compared to Shenmue 1. I've
Yeah,
not
I'd agree with
played. Oh, what's up?
No, I was just gonna say, yeah, I agree. That's what I liked about 2 is that it has a much bigger. It feels much more epic in terms of scope and what's happening, and as opposed to the first game.
But full disclosure, though, I did not finish 3. I haven't started a proper playthrough on PS4. I did dabble in it before, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. It definitely feels like what it tried to go for was a product of the time, which is early 2000s. But the thing that I really did not like was the standalone mechanic, though. But I'm sure we get into that later.
Yeah,
But
we'll
full disclosure,
we'll
though,
we'll we'll definitely get into some critiques about Shenmue 3 because I think we all have as far as Shenmue goes, there are some things that you could criticize about every single game for sure. So, but we'll definitely get into it.
yeah. But full disclosure, though, I haven't finished it. I haven't done proper playthrough, so I will not be heavily involved in Shenmue 3 discussions as far as the final product is concerned.
Mm.
Right, I'm done.
Alrighty. Do you want to go ahead and read off number 2 then?
Sure. What were your initial expectations going into the series compared to how you currently feel about it now? Honestly, I don't really have much of an expectation, really. I just picked it up and played. You know, like the game's cool, whatever. Now, nowadays is like I still don't have high expectations because we started, so you know, I didn't think the game would get a third game in the series, so I don't necessarily had a lot of high expectations going into it before and now, so no, I can't really answer that question to the full extent. So.
Hmm. Oh, go on.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was just gonna say like I actually went into it like I said, essentially kind of blind because like I did hear people talk about it, but I didn't really know what it was about. Looking at it now, though, I do notice a lot of people try to compare Shenmue to Yakuza, and personal opinion on that, I really hate those comparisons. Like I get it. Well, you know, you had one of the developers from Shenmue move on in Sega and create Yakuza, and then we got things like Judgment afterwards, right? But personally, I hate that sort of comparison because I feel like the way that you could look at Shenmue is more of like kind of like a mystery game or like kind of like a detective game where you're really just trying to kind of find out clues and really like start questioning people about things. Like yeah, there is the martial arts in there, right? That's really like based on Virtua Fighter, at least for the first two games. But at the same time, like I feel like you know, Shenmue really just kind of stands out on its own and doesn't necessarily need to be compared to anything else in that regard, especially towards Yakuza, because I feel like they're drastically different games by comparison.
You know, actually, I'm gonna get on that real quick. Sorry to interrupt, though, but I get, like you said, the creator of Yakuza / Judgment was involved with the Shimo series, but I get like just one by one comparison though. They have similar like scale to it of how the games were approached. But when you actually sit down and actually play the games though, they are drastically different from each other. For one, Shimo's by all intents and purposes is a real life simulator. Once you get to the nitty gritty of things, whereas Yakuza, it's fairly arcadey, all things considered.
Yeah, well, another thing too about like Yakuza is like it's only serious when it needs to be. It's kind of like Devil May Cry, where it's like it's serious when it needs to be, but it's like over the top crazy most of the time, right?
I think it's actually the other way around, in my opinion. The seriousness, at least the core story, is that, but the over topness is like the backdrop because the gameplay and story aren't connected to each other. So I think it's more like comes to narrative, it's serious, but when it comes to gameplay, it's not.
Which is fair. I mean, I guess what I see in it, right, is that like like Yakuza is definitely just like this really fun like arcadey type of game like you kind of mentioned earlier. But I think like, and I know some people might hate this like kind of response about me saying this with Shenmue, but like Shenmue is kind of like an experience more so. It's not like your typical game. It's more like if you're really into the experience, it feels more than just a game, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of what I mentioned when I first got introduced to Shenmue, is it felt more like an experience. I think that's the best way to describe it. And it's also because it's like Brandon mentioned, it feels like a real life simulator too, because of the way you play the game. Like you're just kind of every day you're kind of like in a way you kind of have to manage your time in a sense, and you have to. There are certain times where only certain story events can happen and stuff. That kind of thing doesn't apply to Yakuza. So yeah, it is also different in that regard. But I guess to give my own answer for this question too, what was it? Did I have any previous
expectations going into the series? Yeah.
Not necessarily. Like I kind of knew what I was getting myself into. I guess I was a little bit surprised actually, because I thought. Like, I guess I might have thought going in that the whole thing was going to be, like, QTE, so I was kind of... I feel like, if I remember correctly, I was a little bit surprised when there was combat segments in the game, even though they were kind of... At least in the first game, there weren't too many of them. So, yeah, like I was pleasantly surprised by that. The combat was serviceable, like it wasn't anything great, but yeah, at least in the first game, I feel like the second game kind of improved on that a little bit. But yeah, I didn't really have any anything any initial expectations aside from that, I guess. But I guess if we were to maybe talk about right now, like after having played the first two games and some of the third game, uh, like if there was hypothetically to be another one, I guess I might have certain expectations. Like, um, I would really like after playing the third game, there's a lot of changes I'd want the fourth game to make that, such as ditching certain elements that the third game decided to introduce. And also
We'll
in terms
definitely
of,
get into that too, because I do see
yeah,
that's
just to be a little bit more vague about it, I guess, in terms
Mm.
of just certain story developments and things I would want Shenmue 4 to have. Um, but yeah, but yeah, going into it, I didn't really have much of any. But yeah, right now after having played the series, yeah, I probably have plenty of expectations I'd want for a new Shenmue game. Um, but yeah.
Alrighty. What about Sing?
Yeah, I guess in my case, since I came in before Yakuza was even a thing, I obviously wouldn't make that kind of comparison going in. For me, I would say my expectations going in and how they currently are mostly the same outside of one thing, and that's pretty much its emphasis on the combat. I came in thinking there would be a lot more instances of it, considering how its lineage is tied with a virtual fighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of surprised that wasn't the case, but not disappointed in that respect since it still works out. It just places a lot more emphasis on the other elements it presents. So, like with the whole detective aspect, with the side the activities and whatnot. I can't really comment more on Three's combat system though, considering how different it is. Only because I've never really experienced it for myself. So that's pretty much the one thing I can comment on that respect.
So I'll say something really quick about that because I know we'll talk about Shenmue 3 a little bit later, but Shenmue 3 doesn't go for a Virtua Fighter style like combat. It goes more for a streamlined like combat system. On the one hand, I could understand where people might be upset for if they wanted something a little bit more in depth, similar to Virtua Fighter, if they like that sort of like fighting game like play style. But on the other hand, I could see why they would want to streamline it, especially in like, you know, for a modern generation who might not necessarily be into fighting games, and especially since Virtua Fighter has not been, aside from the recent re-release of Virtua Fighter 5, right? That Virtua Fighter hasn't really been that active per se, as far as the series goes. So it's like, it kind of makes sense that they would want to streamline it and make it a little bit more accessible to newcomers to the series.
Yeah, I feel like in a way it kind of helps build off its own identity rather than just being somewhat of a production spin-off of Virtua Fighter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, and if any of you know the history of Shenmue, was originally going to be Virtua Fighter RPG, which, if I'm not mistaken, there is some footage floating around there on YouTube.
I did hear about it, but I haven't seen it personally, if it was true.
Yeah, I think the only production footage I've seen was what they had built for the Saturn build they had for Shenmue 1, which, funny enough, if you've taken a look at it yourself, you'll notice there's some elements that were eventually featured in Shenmue 2, so it's kind of curious as to see how far they were along on that production.
Yeah.
Also, I was gonna say,
yeah,
it's funny we mentioned Yakuza in regards to Shenmue, because that's actually what got me into Yakuza in the first place was actually Shenmue. It's people saying how, like, or at least comparing it to Shenmue. After having played quite a few of the Yakuza games, though, I can say in some ways it's like it, but in a lot of ways it's not. So I guess don't go into Yakuza expecting something like Shenmue. Expect something different, but it's still a good game, so I recommend it.
Yeah. All right, so why don't we have Chaos read off number 3 then?
Sure. Rather than remain on the Dreamcast as with the European and Japanese release, Shenmue 2 would only see a North American release on the original Xbox. Do you feel that the costs of porting and dubbing Shenmue 2 for this release, barring Microsoft's funding, played a large role in contributing to the series' dormancy prior to the Shenmue 3 announcement?
Honestly, no, because Shenmue was already a niche thing at the time it came out anyway. So Microsoft buying the exclusivity rights from North America, while it didn't help though, I don't think it would have made a difference if they had it on Dreamcast as well in North America.
I would have to agree. I don't think, I don't really think it coming over to the Xbox contributed to the dormancy of the series. I, I wish it did kind of have the Dreamcast port as well in North America, but I can kind of understand why they would. Like, I do remember there was like actually a specific reason why it was brought over to the Xbox. I can't remember exactly what it was, but
I can tell you why. Because
yeah,
Peter Moore, he was in charge of Sega in North America for a while, and then after some scuffle with ironically Yuji Naka and then other nonsense that happened at the time with Sega, he got called up by Microsoft. He got the job, and because of his connection and whatnot, he pretty much was the line that made Shenmue 2 exclusive, along with other games exclusive to Xbox.
I mean, if anything, I think it might have been more of a benefit because Xbox at the time was pretty big. So like a lot more people.
Whatnot.
I think a lot of people like, and I mean, we can even take this podcast as an example. Like a lot of people, I think, were introduced actually to Shenmue, most likely through Shenmue 2, and not Shenmue 1. So I think it actually more so contributed to, having new fans for the franchise, if anything.
So I would argue, as far as like the Xbox goes, and I want to say like at the time too, people were kind of looking at the Xbox almost like as if it were the Dreamcast 2, so to speak, because you had a lot of Sega games coming over from the Dreamcast onto the Xbox shortly after the Dreamcast got discontinued. I wouldn't necessarily say that the cost of porting it necessarily was the reason that it cost us the release of Shenmue 3 to take so long, or as long as it did. I would maybe argue that if anything, the lack of it being on like multiple platforms maybe could have been an issue. But then alternatively too, it could have just been a thing of, well, maybe not that many people were interested in Shenmue at the time. Because after a while, people started kind of, getting into Shenmue and realizing, oh, hey, this is actually kind of cool. And, you started getting more and more people kind of turning it essentially into a cult classic, so to speak. So I don't necessarily think it would have necessarily been just specifically because, it was only on the original Xbox per se. Sure, like it probably would have helped for it to be multi-platform. Like, I'm not going to deny that, but I mean, if I'm not mistaken too, the first two Shenmue games had a lot of product placements, right?
Yes, they did, and also they removed them
for the HD release, right? So maybe it was just the product placements that really cost those games so much, but who knows?
As far as I'm concerned, no, because the first game in particular already had a huge budget in general. So the product placement, while obviously would have added to the cost, but that's a lot of money thrown out there, right? It was not the only factor that why the games, had a big budget and ultimately technically was a flop, despite them doing semi well for this new circle.
Yeah.
I don't think it would have had that much of an effect, considering how I'm probably going to be talking a lot of my ass here on this one, but when it came to like the porting process, I think it may not have had to require a lot of work to be done, considering how both the Dreamcast and Xbox tend to be built off a certain Windows platform, not specifically the same one, but close enough to that extent where I would say it would have required minimal porting work. But I would think that, just to agree with Dom's point, it would have definitely benefited to have the series be, oh sorry, the game be a multi-platform release. So, I mean, we've seen other examples of Dreamcast games being ported over to PS2 without any issues.
Hmm.
So by that virtue, it wouldn't have had an issue running on the Nintendo GameCube. Although you may have to consider getting multiple discs for that one because that one didn't run DVDs. We had to deal with smaller discs that I don't recall what their maximum size limits was, but I would imagine that would have played a factor as well. But then you'd also have to consider which of these markets would actually be into Shenmue, like just trying to get into that series because it could be a great fit for Sony, but with Nintendo, that's a bit of a question with the way they were going at the time.
You know, here's another thing too. Um, Given, like at least with like the Dreamcast, for example, right? And then also, I guess by virtue of the Xbox, um, there was never a PC port until the HD versions, right? For either Shenmue.
Well,
but given
going
the
back to
time
that,
period, it kind of checks out considering like a lot of PC ports weren't taken seriously or good or anything like that. So
Mm.
it was understandable, but yeah, you're correct about that. We didn't have PC port until recently.
yeah, I would say going back to that point where I mentioned the Windows platform, these weren't specifically the PC platforms that we were used to. These were more like just similar code base, but tied to the hardware they were working on. So it
Mm.
wouldn't have been an easy porting process regardless. You'd still have to do like your actual porting over to Windows platforms at that time, and not to mention all the bug testing involved with that, which obviously would have been too heavy of a cost for obviously going through just porting a game like Shenmue, which already ballooned up as costs at that point.
Yeah.
It's funny too because I do remember before we even before we got the HD or the HD collection ported to PC, like Shenmue One. I don't know about Shenmue. I'm not sure about Shenmue Two, but I know Shenmue One at least was one of the harder games actually to emulate with the Dreamcast emulator they had out. Uh, like I remember I had some graphical bugs when I tried to emulate that game. And apparently it was a fairly common problem. Like a lot of people had issues trying to emulate it.
Mm.
So I wonder if that has something to do with how hard it might have maybe been at the time to have even considered porting it over to the PC. Um, if we take PC hardware trying to emulate Dreamcast or something.
It probably would have played a part in how it handles translations from Dreamcast APIs to like PC platforms at the time. But
Hmm.
it's kind of a weird thing talking about emulation and then actual porting process because sometimes they're two different things, and then you'll get other examples where some level of emulation is involved. But then again, that's kind of talking about a point that's more relevant in this age, but obviously it was a different time back then.
Yeah. All right. I think we're good on this subject, unless if anybody else wanted to say anything else before we move on to the next question.
Not much to add here.
No? Okay, so I'll let you read off number 4 then, Sing.
Given the series' 14-year dormancy, during that time period, did you have any expectations that the series would receive any form of continuation, let alone conclusion?
I guess I'll go first. Like, I mean, fortunately, like, I guess as opposed to a lot of people who are maybe have been fans for much longer, I mean, I didn't know if it ever was going to continue, which is like, I think one of the biggest like moments was like like everybody else who's a Shenmue fan was the 2015 E3 where they actually announced there was going to be a Shenmue 3, because I was kind of a I guess you'd say I was kind of a doomer about the whole thing until then because I didn't think it was ever going to continue. So to know it actually was going to get a third game was kind of a mind blowing to me at the time. But like I said, fortunately, as opposed to people who have been playing the game for or had to have waited for longer, it wasn't as agonizing a wait because it wasn't until like maybe I mean when they announced that I was probably a fan of the series for maybe a couple of years or so. So I mean it wasn't the same as somebody who maybe played the game like I guess when it came out or not long after that and had to wait that much longer for Shenmue 3.
Yeah, I think in my case, since I did play Shenmue 2 around the time that it came out, I would say roughly 2 years after it came out, I kind of had expectations that it would continue in some form at the time when I played it. But as time went on, like obviously we've had our doubts, seeing if there was any form of continuation, considering what happened not long after Shenmue 2 was released. There was talk of Shenmue Online being in the works, and after like just a series of announcements of nothing going on, that spin-off pretty much got canned before it even really started to hit the ground running on that. So
How would a
with
Shenmue Online work, though?
that's the thing. I don't know if it would have worked because again, this was at a time where online play was just really starting to pick up. So I'm not really too sure if it would have worked considering the time this was in. I think it was around 2006 when I was hearing news on that, but I doubt it would have worked at that point considering what Shenmue is known for, and that's its combat in that respect.
Yeah,
Actually,
I
where
mean,
we
not
supposed
to
to
mention
get?
Shenmue is known as being a very story-focused, like character-driven kind of game. Can't imagine that. I mean, I guess it could potentially, in some form, work online, but it's just it's a weird series to imagine it getting some kind of an online game.
Huh, you know, wasn't Yakuza supposed to get like an online game or have one at
it
some point as
it
well?
did. It did. There is a Yakuza Online or Like a Dragon Online. It was Japan exclusive, and I think it was based off of like the clan builder that they had in like Kiwami 2 and Yakuza 6, I think.
Yep, correct.
Um, which I haven't really gotten into Yakuza 6 or Kiwami 2. I've only played the demos for both of those games. I will eventually get to them because I do want to play through the original Yakuza 2 before I get into those, but beside the point. So I don't know how the Yakuza Online game was or how it played or anything like that, but it did have one.
And I think nowadays you don't hear much news about that one either. Like maybe a grain of news, like maybe once every few months, but it doesn't sound like it took off as well as many people thought it would.
Mhm. So I'm kind of in the same boat here with Chaos in that I did not play the series in the beginning, so I don't have the same sort of grievances as far as like having to wait for the series to get a new entry for 14 years. The only experience that I could kind of relate to in that sense is with like the Devil May Cry series, but um, not as long of a wait by comparison, I would say. Um, Although that being said, you know, now after playing through like Shenmue 3, it's kind of, I guess, a similar feeling of like, hey, we haven't seen anything of Shenmue for quite a bit now. I wonder if we're ever gonna get a Shenmue 4. So I guess now is kind of where I could relate to that as well, as far as like being a Shenmue fan goes.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the same way about it too. I mean, in regards to the idea of us even getting a Shenmue 4, based on the way that Shenmue 3 even happened. Um, and it also kind of has me a little bit worried about the series' future because of, the way Shenmue 3 had to happen. I'm kind of hoping that's not going to be like the status quo going forward because I really don't want Yu Suzuki to be like that limited on in terms of what he can do, I guess. I'd like to have him actually get funded by some kind of a company that is interested in publishing the game. But yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat in that regard. Like I really like at this point, like it's kind of I mean, if these rumors we're going to discuss later is true at least, but it's kind of uncertain what the future of the franchise is at this point. Because as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, we haven't really heard anything about another entry after Shenmue 3.
There's been rumors going around that a Shenmue 4 might be happening, but
Right.
but nothing concrete as of yet. And I do believe that is a question later on in the doc that we'll kind of cover. But yeah, nothing concrete at the moment as far as like what's gonna happen with the potential Shenmue 4.
What question are we on again? Sorry.
We're on question number 4.
4. Okay. Well, I got onto the edge of number 4, so.
Alrighty. I guess I could read off number 5 then. What was your reaction to the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter reveal at E3 2015?
That was a good year. That's just for Shenmue fans.
Yeah.
Because we got both that and Final Fantasy VII remake announcement, I think. And
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Oh, I wish I could relive that moment, but sorry, what now?
yeah. I was just gonna say too, like, because I remember people were saying like, oh, you know, it's gonna get announced, and I remember like, you know, before it had been announced, that like that was always just kind of like one of those E3 rumors that like people would just spread just as like a joke, I guess, or like, you know, like how some people will say like, oh, this is gonna be at E3, but shit never actually happens, and then all of a sudden is like, oh, and by the way, Shenmue 3 is coming. There's a Kickstarter
we
for
got
it.
Half-Life 3 announcement too.
Right? Like,
What are you talking about? Falcon
I want to believe.
well,
We
you
all know
gotta
Gabriel can't count to 3, so
you got a VR game for Half-Life, so you technically got a
Alex.
third game. Like, but yeah, no, like I remember it was just like that rumor going around, and you know, as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, that's cool. I guess I'll back it then, because I actually do want to see this succeed. And at that point, I think I was already playing through Shenmue 1 with my brother for the first time on the Dreamcast that he owned. This was before the HD port when I decided to play the game again on my own. So yeah, we were going through Shenmue, and yeah, and it was kind of exciting to see that, like, hey, Shenmue 3 is here. You know, you had the voice actor that does Ryo's voice reprising his role again, and you know, it was just kind of interesting to see, like, hey, where is this story gonna go? Because we were just kind of left off on this big reveal that there's like this kind of ancient mystery in a cave at the end of Shenmue 2, and it's like, what does this even mean?
yeah, they did allude to some of that in the first game with the, you know, I guess the prophecy of the Dragon and the Phoenix and all that. Yeah, I guess for my part, I was like, I kind of already mentioned, my mind was blown. I couldn't believe that it was actually happening. Like, I think I was I don't think I was watching it live though. Like, I was actually in the middle of something else, and somebody told me it happened, and I was like, yeah, I couldn't believe it when they told me, because I was like, you're bullshitting me. That's not real. You're just fucking with me, right? So then I looked it up, and only to find out it was real. And as soon as I found out the Kickstarter was happening, I was immediately like, you know, where's the link so I can throw money at this?
You're right.
But I backed it for like $100. So I mean, I mean, I would say I'm mostly satisfied, and for the most part, I would say with the, you know, with the what we got from Shenmue 3.
See, at the time I was broke, and I wasn't really like, I didn't make as much money as I do now, and I really wish I could have threw more money at it at the time, because like if I could have, I would have, you know.
Oh, same,
Well,
yeah.
think of it this way: at least you got to back it at the time. I couldn't, because I didn't have the means of backing stuff back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, in my case, I was legitimately shocked when that announcement happened. Like, just hearing its theme, just going through a backdrop at the time, I knew something at that point would happen, but my initial thought was, oh, it's probably just going to be a re-release of 1 and 2, not an outright sequel. So it was definitely a pleasant surprise for me at that point, since I pretty much gave up on hoping for Shenmue 3 at that time.
Mm-hmm. What about Brandon?
I'll say what? My reaction to it?
Yeah.
Hype as shit. There's no else to say about it. I was hyped up. Yeah, I never thought it would actually happen, man. Because, you know, it seemed like one of those bullshit rumors, you know. And when it happened, though, I was pleasantly surprised. Simple as that. Not much to add to that one. It's just simply amazing.
I also want to ask too, like, so would people be more shocked about a Shenmue 3 reveal or like a Half-Life 3 reveal? Like, because I mean, I guess it depends. Like, how long have we
I
had?
Honestly, I will say Half-Life 3 because we had like no
Yeah.
indication of Shenmue 3, right? So that was a big surprise, right? But
Mhm.
Half-Life 3 was confirmed, air quotes, by Valve, and it was in the works. And many years later, so don't see nothing about it. So if we see Half-Life 3, pop up somewhere in the future, I think that will blow up more than say Shenmue, especially since Half-Life
Oh
is
yeah.
a solid base.
I mean,
So,
especially since we already know that they have the. Apparently, it was in the works at one point. Like we know they had, they were working on it at least. So, I guess it wouldn't be too shocking. But yeah, I mean, still.
If I
And it
remember
would-
right, the writer actually gave out the script he had for a draft that was more or less complete, wasn't it?
for Shenmue?
No,
I
for
think
Half-Life.
Half-Life 3.
I did not hear about that actually. I did hear about that for Yu Suzuki. He said he gave out some plots about potential Shenmue sequels or whatever. But since this happened though, he decided to change the story. I'm not sure I tried this.
He originally wanted it to be 7 games, I think he said, right? Like, and now he said he could do it at 5. So I guess he must have rewritten a lot of the story.
Oh, Shenmue City. Yeah, I remember this. This is after he left Sega, established his thing. But this went nowhere.
Yeah, I was
This is the
like,
first
what?
time
What the
seeing
fuck
it.
is Shenmue City? Like,
Yeah.
I'm like only just
Like-
finding about this now.
yeah,
Oh, it's a
like,
phone game.
Yeah,
So-
it went nowhere because I did hear about it, but nothing came out of it. I think it was canceled right after it was released, or it didn't came released. I don't remember, but yeah, it went nowhere.
yeah, yeah, I thought that was kind of weird, but anyway, yeah, let's not diverge too much here. Yeah, I think like just we all agreed that the announcement for Shenmue 3 was really cool, and it's kind of a surprise either whether you were a longtime fan since the beginning or if you were just getting into the series for the first time because you knew, hey, that this was at the time, an unfinished series that, for all we knew, wasn't going to continue.
Yeah.
But I'll go ahead and let Chaos read off number 6, and we'll just go ahead and move on from here.
Okay. So who are some of your favorite Shenmue character or characters? Kind of a tough one to be for me, to be honest. Hard to say. So if somebody else wants to go first, you can go.
For me, it's easy. Master Tao. I love Master Tao.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah.
She's just a freaking badass dude. Like she takes no shit.
Yeah.
Like here they are as Rio struggling to take out like this big dude. I forgot what his name was, and she came in and just did the Raging Demon and called it a day. Like I love this woman.
Yeah,
That's my favorite character.
I would say really quick, like so I feel like I have multiple favorite characters because like there's so many different characters you interact in Shenmue, but like obviously like Ryo, because you go through his whole story and you're going through like his ups and downs essentially. Like the way that I kind of view Shenmue 1 is that like Shenmue 1 is kind of like the depression arc of his story because it's a very depressing game, even like when the like music starts off after his dad is killed, right, and you're just going around his town, right, it's like there's like this very depressing music that's just kind of playing around in the background, like almost like he's like trying to grieve and like process everything that had just happened to him, right, but like he doesn't have the time to, so he's just trying to be strong and really trying to figure out like how did this happen, why did it come to this, who did this, who is Lon D, what's this business with all these mirrors, right, and that's why I think I like Ryo so much. But then I like characters like Tom, for example, who can kick a glass bottle in Ryo's face and not get any shard of glass in Ryo's eyes or face. So
Yeah, I was gonna say like, yeah. Now that I've thought about it some more, I guess for me it's either like, I really like Tom because he's hilarious, and then like, I do like Ryo, but like, he is I don't know if I'd say he's my favorite. I also really like Ren from Shenmue 2. He's a really good character.
Ren grew on me though, because I really did not like him at first.
I didn't like him at first, but yeah, after like the banter between him and Rio, I thought they worked really well together.
I feel like they were kind of like a buddy cop team, you know?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
like
I agree.
Ren, because I think his full like street name was Ren of Heavens, which stands for Knife of Heaven, right? Because that was like his whole thing, right? And like he even carries around a knife and does like shit with his knife, right? But it's like yeah, he's such a like. He's like this arrogant character, but you kind of want to just see him in the story, like, and his interactions in Shenmue 3 are great as well. So, like, but yeah, Ren is great.
Wait till I get to that part.
I mean, like, why wouldn't anyone like him? He's got a realistic goal of wanting that loot.
Yeah.
But yeah, in my case, yeah, I did like Ren after getting to know him a bit more outside of that damn knife, because Jesus Christ, that Q to E was awful. Anyone familiar with that one?
Oh
What
yeah,
we're talking
I
about?
hated that.
I had to reload my save so many times, but I would say from outside of that, another character I was pretty fond of was Guizhong from Shenmue 1, simply because like he's a no-nonsense guy who's very capable of holding his own in a fight without any issues. I mean, like literally the only thing that prevented him from being a big part of the story was just a bunch of steel beams from frickin' Chai.
Yeah, because he got injured, right?
Yeah. And it kind of makes me look forward to see when he'll be brought back into the fold once he recovers, depending how long it would take, and lore-wise, for that injury to heal.
You
I do really want to see more of him in action.
You can actually call him in Shenmue 3. You can call actually a lot of the characters from like Shenmue 1.
I do, yeah. I was aware of that. I know he also shows up in a voicemail conversation in Shenmue 2 if you poked around, what's his name? Endazu's archives for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's definitely had some sort of a presence, but I mean like just more of an active story role, if you will.
Yeah, I'm trying to think who else was a really good character. Is it? It's the Tai Chi master, the one that you meet early on in Shenmue 2. He teaches you the Iron Palm.
One who you teaches you to punch the tree.
Yeah, the Iron Palm.
Yeah.
I can't remember its name, but I know
Jianmin.
we're talking about one of the four masters of. Okay.
Yeah, that was his name. Like he was really good too, because like, you know, he teaches like Ryo a bunch of stuff, and like he was like so like, he was like the friendliest character you encounter early on in Shenmue 2. You know, and he goes out of his way to like, you know, he's like, hey, like I'll tell you anything, you just fight with me. Like that's all he wanted to do was square up with him, right? So that's why I like him so much. What about most hated characters before we move on to the
I was gonna
character?
I was gonna say like maybe we could expand on it, but say like most annoying or most.
Yeah. This one's an easy answer. Freaking Chai. You won't stop dying.
Yeah, I know. I was gonna say Chai, but I remember. It's weird. I remember in the game I found Joy pretty annoying, but in the anime I actually think she's kind of, they really made her look. Her character design is much better in the anime. They made her look pretty hot. I'll be honest.
I actually do kind of appreciate how the anime gave her a bit more of a connection to the plot with that extra detail.
Yeah. I wasn't sure how much of that was anime original, but yeah, like I remember Joy in the game, like she just kind of followed Rio around and she like hung around sometimes. I don't know how much she really like contributed, but because it's been a while since I played
Not
it. But
that much. She mostly just helped out Rio in the beginning of Shenmue 2.
and then I remember in the dub she had one of the most obnoxious voices I think I've ever heard. So that was another thing. But yeah, next to her, Shy.
I'm a Joy simp.
I knew you were gonna say that. Oh my god!
See, I think I like her outfit. I really do like her outfit.
I heavily dislike Joy. I'm like the polar opposite of Brandon when it comes to that. I hate everything about Joy. I cannot stand her character. Like Rio, like yeah, granted she like helped him out, but like I really wish she would have just left Rio alone, because like she's just more trouble for him than anything in my opinion. And especially because in my mind, right, like, and I guess, you know, when they were running like they were doing like fan polls when they were doing like fan Q&As for the like countdown of the Shenmue 3 Kickstarter getting funded, they were asking fans like who is their most favorite female character. It was voted Nozomi, and I personally think that like if they were gonna end off the story right where Ryo comes back to Japan, he would end up with Nozomi by the end. So
You know what actually bothers me about Nozomi? Like she's like a nothing character. She does nothing, and she's supposed to be the love interest for Ryo. I'm like, can you just give her something to do with this story, please? The most she was really a damsel and maybe a few lines or two talking to Ryo, right? But she doesn't do anything though, and that's something that they need to address in future games.
I feel like her purpose was just to establish like a character that's close to Ryo before the events happen, outside of his family and loved ones. So
I
Yeah,
feel like
but
for
feel
Shenmue 4 at least, she should be more involved with the plot. Because like as far as we know, she's still somewhere in Canada.
she's still in Canada with her mom, right? You can call her in Shenmue 3 like you can with some of the other characters, and she asks about some things, and it sounds like she does like they don't, as far as I'm aware, they've never addressed this, but it seems like they would have had like Ryo kind of like call her and mention like some other things, so she's kind of more up to date with what's happening. I don't think she would ever get involved though, just given how the story is going. I think like Ryo is gonna be basically in backwards ass deep redneck China, type of like, backwoods of China, right? Just learning like this ancient kung fu like martial arts, right? And not gonna have access to the outside world. That's what I'm expecting, at least. So
I did. Speaking of the anime too, I did kind of like at least in the anime they did kind of have her do a little bit more in terms of her being involved in the plot. Although she still, like we've been saying, did end up being a damsel in distress, much like in the first game.
For record too, I haven't seen the anime, so or at least.
Yeah, I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, like she tries to help out in some ways, but they're not all that significant. I'll just say that. They try to give her more scenes and give her more significance to the plot, which I did kind of appreciate.
But yeah, I think we're all good on this, unless if anybody has any other hated characters. Londi.
Yeah,
He's barely in the game.
Absolutely nothing character too. But at least he established his dominance in the story, early on. So I can't say like he's garbage, right? Look, we know he's a threat. But like, give us more of him.
Oh, dude, you have no idea. Like, I don't want to say anything about it, but wait till you get to Shenmue 3. If like Shenmue 1 and 2, they kind of already established you're not supposed to like this dude. You're not gonna fucking like him in 3. That's all I'm gonna say.
Yeah, that's quite unfortunate.
Alrighty. Yeah. So why don't I have I'll have Brandon read off number 7.
Oh, if you insist. In your opinion, which Shenmue has the best soundtrack? I don't have a particular favorite between at least 1 and 2. I think they're practically equal because they go for the same type of thing. So I don't have a definitive answer on which one's better.
I would
pass on this question.
I would argue that for me at least, that Shenmue 1 has a more. For me, I like this soundtrack more than Shenmue 2. And that I think that for me, it's just mostly because, like I mentioned, like starting off, it has that like really depressing track. But then it has like these really like ambient tracks for like the middle of the night, or like when you're just kind of exploring around the city and trying to ask questions around like the warehouse area or like just around the town, So I feel like Shenmue 1, at least in my opinion, has the better soundtrack. Shenmue 3 doesn't have a whole, if it has any, I didn't notice, like it doesn't really have original soundtracks. It's more like reused tracks from Shenmue 2 that are just slightly remixed, or just more updated, so to speak. So I would argue that Shenmue 2 and 3 kind of more or less have the same type of soundtrack. And not that it's necessarily bad or anything like that. It's just that I don't know. I really, really just like Shenmue 1 in terms of that aspect.
I would
I
say,
would-
yeah,
go ahead.
despite having only really completed Shenmue 2, I would say 1 had the more memorable soundtrack, in my opinion. I don't recall much of what was original in 2, but I felt like the themes in 1 definitely stood out a bit more, especially the battle theme you hear a lot.
Yeah, well, and the battle theme in both 1 and 2 are like the 1 and 2 is just more like upbeat and louder.
Yeah, but I
So
feel like the rendition in 1, I think just for me kind of felt more appropriate. I didn't hate the 1 and 2, it's just it felt like the 1 and 1 just stood out to me a bit more.
yeah, see, and that I guess like just going off of that really quick before I let Chaos go, and that like I feel like the soundtrack just in 1 really resonates with the overall story and the themes that are handled in that game. Maybe like maybe not so much in 2, but I guess like in 2 they're trying to kind of have this I wouldn't say necessarily happier tracks or anything like that, but just more so like, hey, like it's almost like a new beginning, so everything sounds like it's very upbeat by comparison.
Yeah, I would have to agree though. Like my favorite soundtrack is probably the first game. Definitely had some of the more memorable or the better tracks that I think that complement scenes much better. 2 had a good soundtrack too, but yeah, I just found 1 for some reason. Like yeah, also it had probably one of my favorite tracks in a video game, to be honest, is every time it becomes nighttime when all the street lights come on, and then it's I believe the track's name is Nightfall.
Mm.
I actually love that track. It's really like it just has this moody atmosphere, and it's really fitting for it's just it's the nighttime now, and Rio is walking around at night, and it has that guitar riff.
It doesn't
or-
play the full track in the game when it does the transition. The full track
Yeah.
is like way longer if you've actually heard the full thing.
Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really good, but go on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, that's all I was really gonna say.
Alrighty.
Take a revisit to the soundtracks later then, because everybody over here simply for 1,
Yeah, dude, like, okay, so there's some tracks I'm gonna let you know now if you're gonna revisit that soundtrack. There are some tracks that are just untitled. So if you're looking them up on YouTube, I think they'll be under like unreleased / free, and then it'll have like a number followed by that because they just don't have any like titles for those tracks. I guess they were just never released in the official like Shenmue soundtrack, which is kind of weird when you think about it, but yeah, Shenmue 1 is just like, yeah, I don't know. Something about that soundtrack is just, it's almost like it was perfect.
If I remember right, the official soundtrack used more cleaned up, I would say slightly redone versions of the songs as opposed to what was actually used in the game, if I remember right. At least for some of the tracks.
Gotcha. But
I don't know if that actually was the case. I know it was sort of a common thing back then where when making an official soundtrack, they would just slightly redo the song with more cleaner samples, maybe add some extra tunes here or there. And then when you compare it to the soundtrack, you definitely notice some of the differences. I don't remember if that was the case with Shenmue 1, though.
that was kind of like a thing with, because I own the Onimusha 1 soundtrack. Onimusha's 1 soundtrack includes like tracks that were never used in the game, but they're in there as like part of like the overall like symphony that was used for that. So it's kind of weird to hear tracks that like you were like, hey, I don't recall this ever being in the game. I don't remember this ever being played in like any of the cutscenes or the credits or anything like that. So that might have been just commonplace at the time with like same thing with Shenmue, where they might have not had the exact tracks or added in tracks that weren't there.
It could have also been a thing where they may have just used some sort of internal synthesizer for like the in-game soundtrack and then just went with real instruments for the official one. And like I said, it really depends on the game.
Anyway, I think we're good on this one. So does anybody want to read off number 8 here?
I can read off number 8 here. So,
Alrighty.
let's see. Best or most memorable moments in Shenmue. Okay. I would say probably in my case, that would probably be the end of the final fight in Shenmue 2 because I would say it's somewhat of a turning point for Ryo's character because at that point he hasn't really faced a lot of tough opponents. Like Chai is Chai. Like all he had to do was knock him in the ocean. Like I forgot what's his name before that, but I think that was more of a collaborative effort with Guizhong. So seeing Ryo use a lot of the techniques he learned in 2 to deal with a huge guy like Dong Yu kind of marked a turning point for his skill at that point. Like obviously, like when you look at the scene following afterward where Landy is kind of staring him down from the helicopter, at that point you could probably guess it still wouldn't have gone like in Ryo's favor if Landy had decided to drop in at that point. But at the very least, you knew he had grown a lot as a martial artist at that point. If he could take down like a huge opponent that obviously devastated everyone else at that point.
Mm. Okay.
Can I go real quick? Mine's
Yeah.
kind of short and simple. It's not necessarily the best moment though, but it's the one that stands out the most because I like how they bait and switch the players. You remember in Shenmue 1 where you go to the barber shop and the guy tells you not to move, but if you press a button, you felt it on the thing?
That was in 2.
That was 2?
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
two.
that was one of the guys who taught you the, what was it, the voodoo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole point was not to react and stay calm.
That was 1.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
in
I'm pretty
two.
sure
You
it's
do
because
you do talk to a barber in 1 about the 3 blades, but in Shenmue 2 it's about the voodoo, and you have to, because I was just playing Shenmue 2 to record some footage before this podcast, and yeah, you have to go to this barber shop and you literally just have to sit down and just not react. And the game, like, because the first and second game are both heavily reliant on quick QTEs, right? They expect you to hit that QTE so you fuck it up.
Shit was awesome. That's what I liked about it. It completely turns the whole mechanic on its head just for that one moment, and I just cannot, get that out of my head. It's the first thing that pops in my head. Don't fucking move. Alright?
You know what the messed up part is about that one scene? People actually exploit it just so that they could trigger the bad ending just to see it. Because every time you
Really
fail it, you have to waste a day. So you could fail it as much as you want, just so if you wanted to see the bad ending for that game yourself. That was pretty much the strat.
I didn't know that there was a bad ending.
So how Shenmue 1 and 2 worked was that they were essentially time-based. There is a point to that calendar. If the games go toward a certain date, it's different for each game for obvious reasons, it'll automatically trigger a bad ending depending on which game it is. For Shenmue 1, eventually what'll happen is Ryo will walk home one day only to find Landy back at the dojo already like messing up Fuxan. And of course, at this point where it's going to lead to a confrontation that's obviously not going to end well with them. It just kind of cuts before they strike each other. With Shenmue 2, if I recall, what happened was, I think, regardless of what point of the story you were on, there would be this vague cutscene where I think Landy kind of ambushes Ryo, and then it just kind of cuts to black at that point.
Jesus.
Damn, I didn't know that, because like I never actively went out of my way to max out my days. I have to find out what the cap is so that way, like...
It's actually a fairly generous cap, so again, you would have to go out of your way to mess up and trigger that ending by accident. It's something you would have to go out of your way to do.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, does that get... I don't want to say like altered, but does it become more lenient as you progress through the game, or like...
No, it's essentially a set day, as far as I'm aware. I know that's the case with Shenmue 1. For Shenmue 2, actually, you know what? I do recall if you got to... I forgot the name of the village, but at the very end, it does trigger an alternate bad ending where you just simply get into some kind of accident. I don't remember what it was, but it wasn't as severe as what you would normally get when you were in either in Hong Kong or Kowloon.
Yeah, I gotta look into these endings because I had no idea they existed.
Yeah, you can easily look them up on YouTube. Just look up Shenmue bad ending and you'll easily find them.
Yeah, for me, like the most memorable moment probably is when you first meet up with Shenhua at the end of Shenmue 2, because Shenhua is a character that you don't really know much of anything about in either game for the most part until like the very end of Shenmue 2. So it was kind of interesting to actually get to know, like, because I was wondering about that. Like, I was like, who is this girl and why is she important? And you don't really find out until like end of Shenmue 2, like why that is. Uh, and just the different moments you kind of share with Shenhua at the end of Shenmue 2 were just memorable in their own right. Um, so and then of course you spend the entirety of Shenmue 3 really with Shenhua, as far as I know. But yeah, like that was probably mine.
See, I
And then
probably
of course
would've
just
had-
yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say I probably would have had that same thought, but except for the fact that concerning how Shenmue 2 ended, yeah,
Yeah.
it was a bit of a cock block.
I'm disappointed in you all. Nobody here mentioned any of the moments with Tom or
Oh,
with
yeah,
Doolin.
yeah. So I was also gonna say the motorcycle scene as well from the first game. I kind of like that, but yeah, I was gonna say Tom is close second because
Fucking
like I said,
kicks
he
a
was one of
glass
my favorite.
bottle in your face, like it doesn't hurt you. Like,
Just Tom as a character, just like
well, and then also too, like nobody said Doolin. Nobody said Doolin. The
Okay,
guy that
that's
teaches
cheating.
you
That's
brawler
cheating.
uppercut.
That is cheating. Man.
How?
That is cheating.
How is that
Freaking
cheating?
Doolin.
How? You get to hear, we're putting it down.
Put it down.
oh yeah, I remember that.
Left. Right.
Go.
Okay, we're putting it down.
No, I'm remembering all
But-
the forklift stuff from the first game and the forklift races.
I've yet to win a forklift race, so
Oh, they're not playing? Shit.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think like for me with Shenmue 1, it definitely had like the great moments with like Rio just trying to interact with what's his face, the guy's son. I Singh, you just said his name like not even like half an hour ago. Like,
Wait,
Fukusan?
no, not Fukusan. The guy that helps you get onto the boat and helps you fight Chai. I don't know.
Guizhang?
Yeah,
Oh,
Guizhang. Yeah. I feel like his interactions with Rio were always like really memorable because like he's very serious and like he's the like kind of like the polar opposite of Rio, even though they might be like around like roughly around like similar age, like close to the same age or whatever. I don't know their exact age per se, but like
I think Rio's like 17, right? 16, 17.
He's 18.
yeah, so like
He's 18.
He's currently 18.
yeah, because they him and Nozomi talk about like what school they were gonna go to after high school and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I like their interaction because it's almost like he looks at Rio like almost like, hey, like hey, I get what you're trying to do, but how you're going about it is the wrong way, especially considering the fact that like you're getting like easily angered, you're not really like focusing on like what you need to do, and you're not really like you're just trying to go about it with the martial arts that without having to learn any of these other martial arts. So I'm going to teach you some shit, right? And kind of just goes from there, right? So but Shenmue 2, I think, really great scenes with like Master Tao, because Master Tao is kind of similar in that regard, in that like she kind of teaches him like, hey, you have the right mindset of things, but like also think about this too, that hey, like you're gonna be going on this quest for revenge, and you might not come back from that as far as like just how you are. you know, and that might completely change you as a person. And you know, the people that care about you, they might lose you because of that, because like she lost her brother went off somewhere and she hasn't seen him since. So I think like those moments were really great. And then Shenmue 3 Shenmue 3 is kind of interesting in that like I don't really feel like there was that one standout character like there was in Shenmue 1 and 2 where like you could really feel like they did that. Most of the stuff with Shenmue 3 I feel like that was memorable was with like Ren showing up and like, you know, getting into trouble with Ryo. And you know, and Ren really kind of stands his own and helps Ryo out towards the end because he really kind of saves his ass, so to speak. So, but I'll let you guys experience that since I'm the only one that's completed Shenmue 3 in here.
Alright,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
This is since we're done with this question, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna go ahead and make my exit.
Alrighty, where can we find you, Brandon?
You can find me on Twitch at SirBrandel, Twitter at ImmortalBrandel, and everywhere else. Now you got the business.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I'll catch you guys next time. Thank you for having me down. Enjoy with the podcast, and thank you all for watching.
Yep,
Bye.
for sure. Take care and hope we see you again soon.
Yep.
Alrighty. Now that he's gone, let's talk shit about I'm just playing. Yeah, no, that was Brandon. You guys can follow him on all that stuff that he mentioned. I'll be sure to leave links to where you can follow him and everybody else at the end of the podcast. Well, in the description, but we'll bring up our tags towards the end of the podcast here. That being said, why don't we move on to question number 9? I'll let one of you guys read it if one of you guys want to read it right now.
Yeah, I can read it. If Shenmue 4 were to be announced, what expectations or hopes would you have in terms of how certain plot elements established in the previous entries are addressed? I was actually going to bring this up earlier, so I'm kind of glad there's a question that addresses this. I have a feeling that the whole revenge quest that Ryo is on is going to get a little bit more complicated, or I guess in terms of, because I don't know, this might be addressed in Shenmue 3 because like I said, I haven't finished Shenmue 3, but there is that whole thing about like Ryo's father supposedly killed this guy, you know, it was Londi's friend or whatever.
It was his father. Yeah.
His father, yeah. That's why Londi did what he did. So I'm curious as to like what is going to be revealed if it's not in Shenmue 3. Like Shenmue 4, there's going to be some big reveal or something as to maybe there was something more to this. Maybe Londi, like what if, you know, we get the reveal that Londi, there's some bigger threat than Londi or something like that. What if, because I'm kind of wondering if they're going to go into the more mystical elements of Shenmue that they kind of have been teasing throughout the series with the mirrors and the what would happen if they were to come into contact and all this stuff. Kind of wondering if they ever are going to go more into that. I could kind of see something like that happening, because I think there's a lot of things that get brought up in the games that like I said, if they didn't really answer it in Shenmue 3, they're definitely going to have to in Shenmue 4.
So here's what I'll say about this. In regards to the plot points, because Shenmue 3... So there's a review that I really fucking dislike about Shenmue 3. That talks about... Yeah, I won't say names. Super Eye Patch Wolf. Sorry. Got a bit of a cough there going. But yeah, so, you know, I hate the review in regards to, you know, it was talking about how, you know, the story kind of felt like it was almost like a beach episode of an anime. Like it had no significance. It was very irrelevant. I would highly disagree. And the reason why I disagree is because Shenmue 3 focuses more on the mirrors, like why they were made, where they're from, you know, what the significance of them are, right? Because, like, you know, we constantly see the characters talk about the mirrors in both 1 and 2, especially in 2. And it's like, you know, to go into 3 and then say, like, oh, anything related to the mirrors is just unimportant, right? And that nothing about them needs to be learned about, especially because, like, this was the whole reason that Ryo even went on this adventure to begin with, right? Because his father was killed over these mirrors. You know, it's like, to say that, like, this is like an irrelevant plot point, I think is kind of ridiculous. What I would like to see Shenmue 3 kind of focus on in terms of a plot point, because we kind of have an idea now with Shenmue 3 as to what these mirrors were made from and what their significance were. You know, because these were like old Chinese treasures that you know, Ryu finds out about in the story early on in Shenmue 3. But what I would like to see is like more so dedication to what this like prophecy really means, more in depth on that, because we already got more information on the mirrors themselves, and also they did delve a little bit more into the Chiyu Men, which is kind of like this whole nother like thing that goes on in Shenmue 3, because they get a big focus in Shenmue 3, and I'm not going to get into too much of that, but let's just say they're a whole third party that Londi technically isn't involved with. But
I can go into a bit of that one, but technically he is a part of that. He's one of the 4 heads, and I think Shenmue 3 finally gives us a proper formal introduction of one of the others. I don't know if we want to go into that one for spoilers.
Yeah, I'm not. That's why I'm not gonna really go into spoilers, because they kind of, he kind of is, he kind of isn't. It's a really weird like thing to talk about without spoiling it. So that's why I don't want to talk about it.
Represent the Dragon of the East, even though you kind of think he probably would be wearing blue, but he is supposed to be representing the Dragon of the East. We also get introduced to like the Bird of the South, and I'll go more into one of the other ones.
Yeah, so
kind of sounds similar to what they were talking about with the prophecy of the mirrors or something, like in the first game and also the second one. But I'm kind of wondering if so my theory is that I feel like Londi's whole goal is, like, we know he's looking for the other mirror, so I'm thinking, like, is he trying to combine the mirrors to cause, like, because what it sounds like based on the prophecy is, like, the apocalypse would happen or something like that. If the 2 mirrors were to meet, you come into contact or something. So I have to wonder if that's like maybe the overall goal here. But I don't know, maybe spoilers for Shenmue 3, I guess, if they talk about that. But yeah, I have to wonder if, like, if in the future games they might go into the more fantastical elements of the plot, if they get into that.
Yeah, and, you know, because in Shenmue 2 that was so like out of left field, because you weren't like expecting that, right? That was like so like, oh, you know, this is like a martial arts detective type of game. All of a sudden here's this like mystical shit. Enjoy, and we're just gonna leave you on that. And like, especially like, you know, if you played that game when it originally came out and you had to wait until Shenmue 3 came out like 14 years after the fact, like, I'd be kind of mad. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
I have to wonder if Suzuki's whole thing with the plot is that it eventually might take like a hard left into like the more mystical fantasy elements, and you'll be fighting like monsters or some shit. Like, maybe not, but like I wouldn't be surprised if that's what ends up happening, to be honest.
I don't think it would go that far.
Maybe not that far.
I would think there's something that I don't think has probably been revealed yet, but again, we'd have to wait for a future game to elaborate on that.
Yeah, I would like to them, you know what, too, because we were kind of talking about this, with, like, you know, because in Shenmue 2 and also a little bit in Shenmue 3, like, they kind of mention like nobody really believes that Ryo's dad actually killed Landi's father. So why Landi would, even claim that is kind of strange, and like I kind of hope that they delve more into that and try to figure that out.
That's actually something I was kind of annoyed with Shenmue 3 when it came to in regards to that particular plot point, because they kind of reiterated it as if it were a new revelation, even though they already addressed that in 2. So I'm not sure why they kind of redid that. That was just something I was kind of confused about, because the previous game already established, oh, it's probable that Rio's dad may have killed Landi's father, and that's why Landi was out for his blood. But the way Shenmue 3 kind of presented that revelation as if it were something new kind of made me scratch my head a little bit. I'm not sure why they went that way.
Yeah, so hopefully they a little bit more consistency on that aspect, I think, could be made. Yeah, it's just I think like obviously like we want a story where like Rio makes some progress, but like and we'll kind of talk about this towards the end of the podcast, because I did save this for the very last question, but I think that the story needs to make the type of progress that shows him grow more as a character, grow more as a martial artist, but also kind of delve into some of these lingering questions, or these things that like were sort of addressed but not really fully addressed, or they kind of readdress them as if they were like new information, like what you mentioned with the whole murder plot point there. So it's kind of interesting to see, like, or it will be interesting to see where they would go with a Shenmue 4 in that regards.
Yeah, I would say one plot point, going back to the whole Chio Men subplot, there was pretty much the identities of the remaining 2 heads that haven't been formally revealed yet. We don't know anything about who would likely be representing the Black Tortoise of the North, but we've gotten at least within the side material, not within the main games directly, I would think, if I remember right, outside of maybe one small flashback scene in Shenmue 2, but I want to see how they follow up with the possible reveal of Tao's brother being the White Tiger of the West, and like him actually like meeting Ryo, considering how they both had strong motivations. Like he's essentially another counterpart of Landi, where he joined up with the Chio men to avenge his parents. We don't know the full history behind that, but
I was so curious about that, because I was like, I ended up finding out after the fact, obviously, that Tao's brother was not Landi, because I always figured, like, was he really Landi? Because
I know everybody made that misconception simply because he had a facial scar that didn't quite match up with Landi's, but his backstory sounded similar enough that you would think that would be the case. And then, like, just going through the side material in Shenmue 2, I think it was a comic that was an unlockable in Shenmue 2 that kind of delved more into it, that pretty much all but confirmed that, he is a part of the Chio men, but he's his own character. He's not Landi.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that'd be interesting to see them cover that, because...
that would have been a crazy reveal, though, were the case, though, I'll be honest.
Yeah, I won't go over to what happens necessarily at the end, like the end events of Shenmue 3. But I will say this, like by the end of it, like Ryo heads out to another town to like continue his quest. So I would assume, wherever he ends up in by Shenmue 4, that's where he would run into the other, characters that, like you mentioned, got alluded to, or like, we sort of know about, but don't really have a full history on, per se.
I feel like, considering the events that specifically happened in that ending, which obviously we can't spoil, but I feel like that might happen a lot more sooner than later because they would have to respond to that particular event.
Mm-hmm. Alrighty. Yeah, let me go ahead and read off number 10 because I don't, unless if you guys had any like last minute thoughts to bring up on this point.
Not really. I probably have a lot. I'd probably have a lot more to say if I had beaten Shenmue 3. But yeah, I'll probably have a lot more to say after that. In regards to this question.
Gotcha. Well, and hopefully you do beat it soon because like I even though definitely Shenmue 3 was not a perfect sequel. I do think that it was still enjoyable as a Shenmue game, at least in my opinion. I really enjoyed it. So I think
I would agree.
like, I think you should really like go through that story and really get to the end because I think you'll be just as intrigued as I was by the end. So,
yeah.
But we'll see. Anyway, I'll go ahead and read off number 10. Would you object to the idea of having the series continue or conclude in a different format if video games weren't able to be greenlit? Personally, I would not. I think that like even though we have the Shenmue anime that just happened, I still haven't watched it yet, so I don't know how it is. But like, based off of like what Chaos has told me so far, just kind of in passing, I just kind of felt like it sounds like it has a lot of pacing issues, and I don't know how I would feel about that going into an anime. I know some people, like I've talked to some people, and they were like, yeah, I'd rather just watch it as an anime because I don't think it's a good game. And hey, fair enough. Different strokes for different folks, right? But I personally just would not like the idea of the series concluding in a different format. I feel like it started as a game, it should finish as a game.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I mean, like, if it's absolutely, I guess, impossible for the series to conclude as a video game for whatever reason, like, I wouldn't be opposed to it continuing or concluding in some other medium. But it's like Dom said, it wouldn't be ideal, and it started out as a game. I really would hope that Yu Suzuki can finish the story as a game and not something else. And not to mention, like, if it did conclude in some other way, I feel like it's gonna be like not a lot of people except maybe like some I don't know. And
I feel like it's really like the people that don't really care about Shenmue as a game, that's what they want. And like, hey, that's cool if you want just to be able to experience the story without ever playing it. But like,
and it's one of those things where you think about, like, if a newcomer were to pick up Shenmue and they played, like, I don't know, let's say 1 through 3, and they never made 4, and they're like, oh well, the story concluded in some other thing, they'd be like, well, you just got to go read that. It's some people aren't going to want to do that even if they were really invested in the plot, so they would just never know how it concludes or whatever. So I just feel like it would be weird for a lot of people, like, play the game and to know, like, well, the story is going to end in some other thing. You need to like, maybe, I don't know, like a manga series or something like that that you need to read.
Yeah,
I would say it would work best as a last resort kind of thing, but ideally I would prefer it as a game. It's just with the way the industry is now, it kind of brings it into question. But again, I guess we could say that as a separate question for later. But I would think that it also kind of raises the question that if they were to adapt it to like something like, say, an anime for the content that was never released, it makes me kind of wonder if it would have the same pacing restrictions that adapting pre-existing content would have.
yeah,
Yeah, because that's kind of the thing I've been noticing with the anime is, like, it does cut, like, a lot of the moments, which I understand, where Rio is kind of having to run back and forth to different people and ask them a bunch of questions about stuff. It kind of changed that up so to kind of cut down on time. So I don't really mind that so much. But yeah, I think that sort of thing gets lost in translation when you're adapting it. So I think that if Yu Suzuki had a lot of that kind of stuff planned for the other games that definitely wouldn't be carried over into any kind of adaptation. So I think we would probably expect that.
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say too, like in that regard, like, you know, it's kind of like what I said earlier. It's that like, you know, Shenmue, and I know again, I know some people might hate me for saying that, but like Shenmue is the type of game that it's more of an experience. It's not like your average game. So like having it just all of a sudden change to a different format, it's like, well, it's not the same anymore. You know, you're not going through that experience. You're not following Ryo's story in the same way because you were going out of your way to like ask all these people like, you know, these random questions, and you were going out of your way to like, you know, really try to find out what they meant with all the notes that Ryo like wrote down.
Yeah, you kind of had to discover the clues at your own pace, as opposed to something like an anime where it's on a time limit, so it really has to get things moving.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then too, like if it was just turned into like a comic or manga series, right? Like it's not the same because it's like, yeah, they're not gonna have all these like little intricate details. Like, hey, you know, like all of a sudden Ryo in the middle of his quest decided to go play arcade games, or all of a sudden he decided to spend all of his money on you know, on capsule toys and then sell them at the local pawn shop, or you know, something ridiculous like that. Like and yeah, I know it's like that's, well, like yeah, no shit, like yeah, you're not gonna see all that, or you're not gonna see like all these like, you know, there are like optional quests and fights that you can get into that are, as far as I'm aware, they're like super rare and not mandatory by any means, but like, you know, like you wouldn't get that experience like at all like just by reading a manga or like watching an anime, because they're going to cut all that stuff and they're just going to focus on the very hopefully at least the very important plot details, but sometimes those minute details kind of build up to that bigger plot point, I think.
Right.
So I don't know, that's I guess that's how I feel about it. It's like I just don't think it would really work that well as anything else but a game. Like after the fact, sure, if you want to do a full-on adaptation of the series that way, like sure, go, by all means, go for it. But until it gets finished as a video game series, don't do anything with it.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm really hoping that it can actually conclude as a game series and not something else. Although I guess in my opinion, I would even if it can't conclude as a game series, I still like I am so invested in the series that I would still want to know how it was going to end. So just knowing that, at least I'd have some closure with the series, even if it couldn't conclude as a game.
Yeah. Alrighty. So I'm gonna go ahead and let Singh, if you want to go ahead and read off number 11.
All right. So, do you believe Shenmue 4 will be crowdfunded like Shenmue 3 if it happens? And if so, would Shenmue 3's reception have an effect on whether a crowdfunding campaign for Shenmue 4 is successful or not? So,
I actually wrote up this one, so yeah. I think I have kind of addressed this before, but I'd just kind of be reiterating what I've said. I hope that the rumor I've been hearing, and this, I guess this would kind of factor into the to what I posted about before we did the podcast about that rumor that there supposedly may or may not be an announcement for Shenmue 4.
Mm-hmm.
But if it is true that there is a publisher that might be picking it up, that's great. Yeah, I am kind of wary if it gets crowdfunded again, or if it has another Kickstarter campaign. I am very much wondering if it will be as successful as Shenmue 3's, because Shenmue 3, like, I think we have to remember, had like a lot of hype behind it, and I'm not sure if Shenmue 4 is going to have that same level of hype. Like, I don't know what you guys think, but it's not really the same situation as you know, when Shenmue 3 was announced. No, we have Shenmue 3. We know what it is. I mean, we need to be honest. People have very, I would say, like, kind of it seems like kind of split down the middle, I would say, with the opinions on Shenmue 3. I don't know if I'd say it's love it or hate it, but there is definitely a lot of people that like the game, and there was a lot of people that liked the other Shenmue games that were really disappointed with Shenmue 3. So I'm really not sure how Shenmue 4, if it is going to be crowdfunded, like, is it going to have the same amount of support behind it? Now, if that's not the case, if it does get a publisher that picks it up, like, I don't think we have to worry so much about that. But if it's crowdfunded, then I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if it's gonna get that kind of same level of support.
So, here's what I'll say on the matter. Given how some people have reacted to Shenmue 3, and mind you, I understand the critiques of Shenmue 3. Some of them I just don't really agree with because they're misinformed. But others, they're just kind of more like, well, you know, what did you really expect? It's almost like you expected this to be a completely different game than what Shenmue was. Some of them were a little bit more specific, given, like, you know, how the visuals looked for Shenmue 3, how they specifically try to make it look more like a, you know, like the original Dreamcast games, but just high quality, as opposed to, you know, having, like, more realistic facial animations and stuff like that, which I know was some people's complaints on that. Which, you know, to be fair, I can kind of agree. You know, you're on a better engine, you have this technology, why not take advantage of it, right? But some of this other stuff was like, oh, well, the only way to make money was, like, you could only chop wood, which is not true. You know, there's a lot of different ways to make money in Shenmue 3. I know, like, some people were not liking the fact that, like, Shenmue 3's combat was streamlined to be more accessible, because it wasn't really carrying over that Virtua Fighter combat. But, you know, again, I think that was okay, just given the context that, you know, people who might have been into Shenmue might not be playing Virtua Fighter, and Virtua Fighter, as far as I'm aware, aside from that re-release of 5, has not been very active as a series. So to an extent, I understand why they would want to streamline it, especially for newcomers who don't play Virtua Fighter or fighting games in general, for that matter. So to kind of address the original question here, you know, would Shenmue 3 be crowdfunded? If it were, or I'm sorry, I meant to say Shenmue 4. Yeah, my bad. Thank you for catching that. But yeah, so if Shenmue 4 were to be crowdfunded like Shenmue 3, right? I think that in order to even be successful, they would have to show off something way more significant than what they did with Shenmue 3. Because Shenmue 3, all we had was like, hey, you know, it's just Ryo and Shenhua walking down the stream or whatever, right? Like, it wasn't really anything like major. So like if a Shenmue 4 had a Kickstarter or GoFundMe or whatever the case may be, right? They would have to show like some significant gameplay in order to significant enough to show that, hey, like, these are the improvements we made, these are some of the things that we're changing, here's how Shenmue 4 might be different from the last 3 Shenmue games, especially Shenmue 3, and this is why we think you'd want to, you know, fund it. Otherwise, though, I do think it might be best not to crowdfund it and just find like a you know, like a smaller publishing studio that would be willing enough to publish it. Because, yeah, it might be a smaller budget game, but in the long run, that might be beneficial.
Yeah, I'm kind of of the same opinion. I would definitely rather have them actually find a developer, even if it is, you know, a smaller budget game. Like, I'd be fine with that. Shenmue doesn't need to be a big budget game in the first place. So I mean, I'd be okay with it. It would definitely, I think, my opinion, be much more difficult if they went the crowdfunding route again. For some of the reasons we've laid out. I mean, obviously, like I mentioned before, the fan base is a little bit divided, I think, on Shenmue 3. So Shenmue 4, like Don was trying to say, I think they'd have to win a lot of people over with the announcements, with the Kickstarter, for people to want to be on board again.
I think also what's not helping too, by the way, before I let Singh go here, is that, like, the thing that, because, like, I completely forgot that this had happened, that, you know, when Shenmue Shenmue 3 got its publisher of Deep Silver, they ended up announcing too later on that, like, hey, by the way, we're going to make Shenmue 3 an Epic Game Store exclusive. A lot of people don't like Epic Game Store. Rightfully so, because, they support communism. So, yeah, and...
Well,
yeah,
there
so
was more to it than that, but
that's the cliff notes. Is that they like supporting Winnie the Pooh.
Yes,
and
I should have brought that up too. Yeah, they would definitely have to not do that.
yeah,
Steam, like, it's pretty much, it goes on to Steam and maybe some other digital distribution platforms. Do not do this Epic Game Store exclusive bullshit. It's even like, and I think probably the reason, if I could guess, as to why they did that is because maybe Epic offered them like a lot of money for them to do it, maybe an
that's
exclusivity
generally
deal.
how it goes. They'll offer
Yeah,
like the publisher.
But in the long run, it's a better business decision to turn that down and be like, we're gonna put it on Steam. It's going to make way more sales. It's going to I feel like that would be the better idea. Like, you're going to get more money that way in the long run, as opposed to like a short term thing. You get the money from Epic, but you're really not going to see a lot of, that's really going to limit your sales, I would say, from just having it on that one platform exclusively.
well, yeah,
Keep in mind,
and
this was affecting the backing itself because
Yeah.
remember when the
Yeah.
Kickstarter was announced, they explicitly said that for PC it would be on Steam. Epic Game Store wasn't a factor when the Kickstarter was revealed.
I remember
so,
that, yeah.
So yeah, so to have like at the last like few months of leading up to the release, to have like your keys suddenly be for a storefront that you did not agree to like be a part of, but yeah, that definitely hurt its reputation a lot.
yeah, and that was like, I don't know how many people backed it specifically for PC, because this was like supposed to be, as far as I'm aware, a PC/PlayStation exclusive at the time, right? Because I think PlayStation was handling all of the advertising for Shenmue 3 at the time.
Yeah, I would say Sony was a big contributor to its funding. I think before Deep Silver was revealed, people just assumed it was only going to be Sony.
Yeah. Which, at that point, it's like, you can't go around promising one thing and then turning around and giving something, completely different, right? And that was kind of the case with the backing for Shenmue 3 for the Steam version. Thankfully, because of how many complaints came in, because, they did have a lot of backers for the Steam version. They did say, hey, if you do want the Steam version, we'll give you your key a year later. Otherwise, I think it was like, I think they were offering people refunds if they really just wanted the refund. But they did offer to give people their Steam keys after the year, if they really wanted the Steam key and not Epic Game Store.
And keep in mind, this was after Tim Sweeney went out of his way to say, oh, it'll never happen because Valve wouldn't allow it, even though like everyone knew that wasn't really the case, but that's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would think, going by the series history, like when we look back at how much it took to develop Shenmue 1, it was, like, without much of exaggeration, a huge cost sinker for like Sega in general, at least for Shenmue 1. With Shenmue 2, it was a different story. It didn't cost as much. It was more of a realistic budget, despite being a game that was much bigger in scope in terms of locations and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a part of that had to do with the fact that, most of the development was just R&D for like the game's engine and how it handles certain things. And since Shenmue 2 mostly was built off of Shenmue 1's work, obviously you wouldn't need a huge budget just to redo everything, since you had most of the work done.
Yeah.
I would think that same thing would potentially apply to a Shenmue 4 in regards to Shenmue 3, because when you consider how the game was developed, it was done through Unreal Engine 4, which still has a lot of use. Like, even with Unreal Engine 5 in the horizon, it wouldn't take that much to just simply port everything over to that engine. Maybe some minor graphical touch-ups, but even then, with the way games are handled nowadays, it's not going to take that much to at least
All it would be
improve the
is
back
really
end.
just asset flips. Like the stuff that they would really have to work on is new moves and new dialogue, but other than that it would be just asset flipping at that point, right?
It wouldn't even have to be a lot of asset flipping. Like again, most of the work was just for the engine itself, which we've already have established in that regard. So I would say like even just making new assets wouldn't heavily slash into a potential budget. So I would think it's more of a similar case with Shenmue 1 and 2, where if a Shenmue 4 were to be worked on, it wouldn't cost as much, I would think, depending on what their scope is for that game.
Alrighty. So I'll go ahead and read off this last question here, and then we could wrap things up. Shenmue was originally meant to be an 11-chapter series. During interviews for Shenmue 3, creator Yu Suzuki mentioned on several occasions that he believed he can finish the series within 4 to 5 entries, though if at all possible, he'd like to complete the series with all 11 chapters. Do you think the series should still continue until all of the chapters are completed, or do you think it would be best to conclude it by the 5th entry?
I could have sworn it was 25.
Yeah, so I actually do have the article pulled up here, and I thought it was seven entries, unless if 11 chapters meant total, that's what it would come out to, is 7 entries, because I do think that like Shenmue 2 was like 3 chapters.
Yeah, Shenmue 2 was supposed to be 4 chapters, but they cut out chapter 2 and condensed it into a simple comic.
Yeah, so it's
which makes it all the more surprising that the anime didn't touch up on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess on that regard, I would say like if if the resources are there, if it's possible, then I would be all for him telling the story he originally wanted to tell. But if it's not, like, you know, if it's not possible to, you know, it's to make that like 7 games, then yeah, I would say 5 is, if all you could do is 4 or 5, then I guess you got to take what you can get, right? Because like we've been saying, like, it would be preferable to see the series conclude in video game form as opposed to something else. So I would definitely like to see it end that way, even if Suzuki might have to somewhat compromise, I guess, his original vision for the plot.
Yeah, he does mention in the article too that they that they would have to cut out a lot of things, which is maybe similar to what, like, how they did with like those comics for like, or for that comic for like Shenmue 1, where they kind of discuss what happens on the boat before Ryo gets to Hong Kong in Shenmue 2. So I guess that stuff would kind of make sense, but like at the same time, like, yeah, it would be great if we could actually like experience that and actually like, you know,
Such a wild story with chapter 2, because
Yeah.
from what I remember, like, there was even an interview where, I don't know if it was with Yu Suzuki specifically or if it was with Ryo's actor, where apparently they had done the mocap and voice acting for the hypothetical chapter 2, and it is referenced in the beginning of Shenmue 2 with the little girl, but for whatever reason they just didn't have the time to implement it. So it's kind of wild that even with the HD release, like, they never considered like simply re-implementing that, although that probably would have been too much work to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I would, you know, so like that's what I would assume would happen again, is like they would just cut out the, like, because like even Yu Suzuki says like, yeah, that we would cut out the most like unimportant stuff and just put in the stuff that really focuses on the story. And like, you know, I'm not gonna say like, hey, like all that stuff is like completely important, because we don't really know like how much of that stuff is really important. It could be just small tidbits that don't really add much to the story, right? And again, that kind of contradicts what I said earlier about like, you know, every little detail kind of leads up to that bigger picture, right? But like, you know, at the same time, like some of those things, you know, yeah, maybe they could get cut if it means that we could finally get a conclusion to this story, which is what I think a lot of people would rather see, is the story get concluded. Because I know, a lot of people assumed that Shenmue 3 was going to be the final game, which I don't know why that assumption got thrown out there, just because I never pictured Shenmue 3 being that. I feel like they would have advertised Shenmue 3 as such if it was going to be the conclusion of Shenmue.
Yeah, and I mean, didn't we know for a while too that that wasn't the case with what Suzuki's said in interviews about how he wants this to be, wanted it to be like a longer series?
Well, yeah, but see, here's the thing with that too. It's like for the people that do keep up to date with like some of the news that gets spread around about Shenmue, like yeah, you would know that. But I've literally talked to people that did not keep up with that information and had no idea that that was said.
Oh, so you're just talking about like, you know, the casual.
Yeah, the just like casual players. Then they were still upset, and I'm like, well, why? This was like never said that this was gonna be the case. Like you assume that.
I mean, I wouldn't even be upset about that. I'd be like, okay, cool, we're gonna get more. You know, like, well, hopefully at least. But yeah, I mean, I feel like I wouldn't have wanted it to be the final game, to be honest. I'm like, I still want more. I don't want Shenmue 3 to be the end.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, my take on it would be is that, like, you know, yeah, I guess it would be cool to see if he could realize the full story of 11 chapters, right? That'd be amazing. Excuse me, that'd be amazing, right? But at the same time, like, you know, if it can get completed in, like, 5 or maybe even, like, 6 games, right? Like, you could maybe, you know, maybe squeeze out a little bit more room for a 6th game that really focuses on, like, really concluding that story. You know, because for all we know, like it could literally end where just, you know, Ryo ends up killing Lan Di. He figures out what the prophecy meant, what the mirrors are for, or what the cave is really all about, right? And then it just ends, right? And yeah, sure, like we'd finally get a conclusion, right? But then it's like, is that it? You know what I mean? So it's like, I guess in some right, like, you know, maybe if he could try to squeeze in a little bit more out of those 11 chapters, if possible, to make a 6th game.
I mean, it's like I've been saying, like when we were talking about like what we think is going to happen with the plot and all that. Like, I feel like it's going to be more than just Ryo ends up killing Lan Di. I think there's probably going to be like, when they start revealing more stuff, there'll probably be way more to it than that. So, like, I hope that's not all it is. Like, that would be kind of disappointing, honestly, if it's just like, yeah, Ryo kills him, and there we go. Like, and then I feel like it would also kind of be ignoring some things that I feel like the game was, you know, and it's usually the case with most revenge stories that, you know, you shouldn't give in to revenge. You should be better. You should be above it or something like that. And I feel like that's kind of where I feel like that's gonna go here. That Ryo probably won't end up killing Lan Di or something, but I don't know. That's just my assumption. But then there are also revenge stories where
where they go through with it. Yeah, so
exactly.
I feel so aside from like Lan Di possibly getting killed by Ryo, right? I don't know. I feel like the way that I would see Shenmue ending is that, you know, like Ryo figures out all the stuff that, you know, that I'd mentioned before, and then it would literally, you know, because kind of like how Shenmue 1 started, where you're literally just walking out of his house, literally just do that in reverse. You're literally just going back home, and then it just cuts to him going home. You know what I mean? Like, but I feel like that would be like you know, because it's like how Brandon said it earlier, right? It is like kind of like a realism simulator, right? And you know, in my mind, right, that's kind of how I see it. Like, he comes home, you know, he says hello to everybody that he's finally made it back home, right? And then it just, you know, he just goes back to his normal life. Like, that's how I feel like it would end after like that huge adventure, is like just kind of like having that like essentially that walk home, and just reflecting on everything that happened in all the other games and all the events that happened in the very last game. That's how I would envision it ending, you know, so to speak. But maybe that's a little bit ridiculous. So I don't know how you guys.
I don't know. I guess I always kind of envision things a little bit more grandiose than that. But I don't know. I guess I could see that too.
Well, I'm not saying like you know, those grandiose things wouldn't happen. You know, I'm saying like that would happen before that, right? And then as just kind of like a like a final
okay,
like
yeah.
goodbye, you know, like maybe as like
Yeah.
the, you know, kind of like how Shenmue 2
So they
ends,
have
where
to
you're
walk,
literally
yeah.
just, you know how Shenmue 2 ends, where like you're literally just walking through the forest with Shenhua, right? Like
Yeah.
I don't know, that's kind of how I picture it, right? Is like Rio is literally just coming home at that point by the very end, you know, and maybe you could have like the credits rolling as he's like walking through, right?
Yeah, and I mean, maybe it's not even just Rio. Maybe it's him coming back with some of the people he's met along his journey. Like, you know, maybe Shinhwa comes back with him or something like that. I could see that being or like what might happen. If
Or
that's
maybe
the
you could
that's
just
the
have
way
an
it might.
introspection of events that have happened throughout the series. So that'd be a good excuse to have certain events from previous games redone in modern graphics.
Yeah,
True.
I could see that.
Unless if they just do it as a flashback thing where you literally just see those cutscenes like upscaled, you know?
That
With
could-
Yeah,
with
they
the
did kinda
exception
do
of the
something
newer
like that
games,
for-
right? But
They did kind of do something like that when they have like flashbacks in the in Shenmue 3, where they have like, you know, the footage from the old games, but it's just kind of, you know, kind of thrown in there.
yeah. So I don't know, that I guess that's how I kind of see it. But like, you know, I talked quite a bit. I don't know, how do you feel about this thing? Because I don't know if you really had much else to say on it.
Honestly, I wouldn't say I have much to add to this. Like, I'd want you Suzuki to have his vision completed the way he would ideally put it as. Like, even if it took like maybe an extra game or two. At the end of the day, like it's better to have a consistent story than a rushed one. So I guess it really depends on how like future games play out in that sense. I would think that maybe with Shenmue 3 out of the way, he'd have an easier time focusing on like future entries with a bigger scale, and that allowed him to add in more plot. But at the like end, it's just a bit of a mystery as to whether or not that'll be the case. I'm hoping that yeah, we do get a proper conclusion with everything addressed. But you know how things are sometimes with production. We don't always get what we want, but we just have to hope for the best.
Yeah, for sure. I you know, because he does say he also does say like four to five entries. So Shenmue 4 possibly, right, based off of what he said, could be the last one. I kind of hope not. I feel like a fifth. You know what I mean? Like I feel like a fifth game makes more sense, at least based on how this series goes. But like, you know, if possible, you know,
I don't think
keep it.
4 in total is going to be enough. But yeah,
Yeah.
it would make more sense to do 5 or 6.
Yeah, like I feel like at least a 6, a 5 and a 6, right? Like that's where I would want it to end, maybe, or at least even like if it's possible up to 7. You know, like because I know that was like kind of the thing people talked about too, is that it was planned as a, like, you know, they said it was 11 chapters, a 7-part series, and they might have had to have cut out some of those chapters along the way, right? But it's like it would be nice to see it like actually conclude the way that, you know, how he would want it to end, I guess.
It honestly really depends on how paced those like unreleased chapters are, because going back to chapter 2, there really wasn't much to it. It was just a simple fight with Chai. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd have to think back, maybe like if he were to implement all those chapters, he could potentially repace them so that it'd be more of a consistent flow.
True.
One chapter wouldn't last longer than the other. I don't know how they separate chapters in Shenmue 3, because obviously I've never played that one to its fullest, so I'd have to look into that myself. But it's something I'm really curious about, to see how like these future chapters would be paced.
So anyway, I would have asked Brandon what he felt about this question, but he's long since been gone. Why don't we go ahead and do our outros and wrap things up here? So I'll let you go ahead, and where can we find you, Sing?
Well, you could just simply find me on Twitter under my ad at Sing_Long. That's pretty much all there is.
Gotcha. How about you, Chaos?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at KaptainKaos, and you can also find me at YouTube. I have the same name. You can also follow my Instagram, where I post my art at Enigmatic Arts. And that's pretty much it.
Yep. And then you guys can find me on YouTube, Twitter. Not really anymore on Twitch, although I do want to start streaming again maybe in the future before I get all situated with my move and stuff like that. Maybe more on YouTube. I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. But yeah, for the most part, YouTube, Twitter, that's where you can find me as BioDevil_Dom. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoyed this podcast. And we hope you could tell us where we could find some sailors.
Damn it.
I had to squeeze that in there, right?
Years ago, I used to be Chinese.
Yes. Yes. Help us find sailors, and where can we find Chinese people who know about Chinese? Anyway, this has been another BioDevils podcast. We will see you all in the next one, and I'm thinking maybe we might talk about some Resident Evil stuff, but I'm not too sure yet. But until then, this has been fun, and we'll see you all next time.